Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of our podcast series, Introducing New Artists, Conversations with Visual Arts Majors at UCSD. I'm Professor Amy Adler, a faculty member in the Visual Arts Department. In this series, I'm speaking with studio art honors students about their artistic evolution, their creative processes, and the unique challenges facing emerging artists today. I'm particularly interested in understanding how our students navigate the complexities of developing their artistic voices while preparing to launch their careers in an ever-changing professional, political, and personal landscape. And today I'm joined by Angelo Aguila, a senior in our honors program, whose work explores relationship between time, movement, and personal identity. Drawing from his experiences commuting between National City and UCSD, Angelo creates paintings and drawings that address themes of isolation, sexuality, and Filipino-American identity while incorporating imagery that mark his daily journeys. I am joined by 12 other students from the Studio Art Honors class of 2025. Hello. We're excited to learn more about Angelo's artistic evolution during his time at UCSD and hear his perspectives on what it means to be an emerging artist in 2025. So let's begin our conversation. Greetings, Angelo.
Hello.
Hi. Could you start by introducing yourself to our listeners?
Hello, my name is Angelo Aguila, and I'm 22 years old, and I was born and raised in National City, California.
Okay, great. Angelo Aguila.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So we would love to know a little bit more about you. What drew you to study art at UCSD? What were some key experiences or turning points that led you here all the way to being a senior in the honors studio art program?
So I didn't really know up until senior year during college admissions. Up until then, I hadn't really been making art at all. But during admission season, I sort of had this epiphany because mentally I was on track into going into the medical field, becoming like a nurse. But I really just like sat down with myself during then, and I wanted to commit to going into art. And even though I was like facing like backlash from my family because of like the cultural norms around me having to go into like the medical field, and like for context, I grew up in a single parent, low income household, so that was like a bit of a shock for my mom, especially since there were questions around like, how could I help my family get out of a situation if I was pursuing something like art? So that's my journey up until here.
Well, if your mom is listening, I'm just here to say that you're an amazing artist, and I have a lot of faith in you.
Oh,
so
thank you.
You're going all the way, Angelo.
Okay.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your current work and what you're exploring in your art practice?
So right now I'm working on an oil painting, and it's based off a sign in my city. For context, I've been commuting ever since first year, and on my ways to commute to get to the freeway or the trolley station, I'd come across miles of cars, and there's this one specific sign, a Chevrolet sign, and at the very top it says "coming" in all caps, and it's just become such an evocative image for me, especially when I'd come home late at night out of my car or on the trolley. I'd just see it like glowing in the sky. And I've taken that as, well, as much as I'm resonating with the sexual aspect there, I'm more interested in coming as like a phrase, as like in I'm on my way. Because I was thinking a lot about where I am right now with my life and reflecting on feeling stunted because of my experience around sexuality and how I feel like so behind around that. And like in relation to the phrase of saying like, oh, I'm on my way, even though like if you're late.
Your work has such an exploratory surface. Your mark making and use of paint and color are so intentional and specific. Can you talk about your painting process specifically and like how you make the decisions you make when you're making your paintings?
I'm always thinking about what I want to make, and that's why I'm always writing in my notes, specifically on like my iPhone. I don't really have like a journal or anything, but when I'm painting, sometimes there are very like set things that I want to keep intact, but I'm very open to seeing where my mind will like deviate from original things as the process continues. Yes.
And do you find that if you discover something, a process or a mark or some sort of way the paint behaves, that you tend to repeat those things and add it to a kind of language that you're starting to develop as an artist?
Yeah, on the topic of like discovering new languages within painting, there was this, well, up until let's say last year, I've been pretty much working with like very thick opacities in oil paint, and as I started to thin it more down, I've become more interested in seeing how versatile oil paint can be. And even though, at least so far right now in my practice, with that being my primary medium, even though some people can see it as being like fixated and like restricted, I feel so like inspired with having something so limited and knowing that I can do so many things with it.
And you mention in your statement and in conversations working from both your imagination and from family archives. So how do you decide which approach to use for a particular work, and how do these different starting points affect the final painting?
I have a pretty very vivid imagination, and it wasn't just until third year where I started to look into family archives, where it just comes from a desire for me to like know more about the people I'm around, specifically my family, since at least from my dad's side of the family, I'm not really connected with them. And that was one of the main entry points into going into this, because I had asked my aunt about if she had any photos of her and my dad in the Philippines, since, for context, I was born and raised here, so I've always felt, what is it, disconnected from my culture in that sense, because there's a very obvious discrepancy between a Filipino American versus a Filipino who was born and raised there. So, yeah.
That is literally my next question was about your identity as a Filipino American and working with themes of time and sexuality. Just wondering how those aspects of your experience intersect with your art practice. You may have just answered that, but if there's anything else you wanted to say.
At least from a personal standpoint, it's been a bit hard because I'm a reserved person to begin with, and as I was going into this, specifically with talking about like the intersection between like being Filipino and like sexuality, I was so scared to talk about it. It started in the drawing classes that I took with Gosha, and it was for a final where I was deathly afraid of like doing it because it was subject matter that I didn't tackle at all before, but I knew like deep down that that's what I wanted to make with my art. And it's just been like a very complicated tightrope of deciding whether or not I feel like I want to share certain personal aspects within my identity without crossing like a boundary of me feeling like I'm sharing too much and then I'm gonna like feel bad about it later down the road.
Understandable. How do you feel that your community of peers and at UCSD has received you as you kind of have become more open about these things in your work and life?
Honestly, it's been so great, but I'm kind of like surprised because some of the things that I do, it's kind of absurd, and people have sort of associated me with like a lot of naked self-portraits and like weird positions, but I appreciate the support a lot. Yes.
That's great. Maybe we have a question from our audience. Does anybody have a question for Angelo?
Yes, I have a question. Outside of just artwork, are there certain specific things, maybe like hobbies, that inform your art practice?
One specific hobby that I love to do is secondhand shop, specifically thrifting. Before it became like a booming thing over these last couple years with like Depop sellers. um, Me and my family, we were doing that because of like financial means, since it's way more affordable. And but speaking on like how that intersects with my practice, I have this fascination with like existing things already that are out in the world. And I think that's part of why I went down the road of checking through family memorabilia, because these things are already existing for me. And with me already wanting to connect to my family even more and my culture, I want to like utilize these things and breathe my own like spin in life into things, even though if things are like old and dated.
Interesting. So art careers are challenging, and we live in this world that is rapidly changing with AI and economic shifts and evolving social media landscapes. So what drives you to create art despite these uncertainties, and how do you see your work responding to this moment we're living in?
I think one of the main driving things is that I found art to be a form of communication and a form of healing for me, because at least culturally, topics of like sexuality and struggles within my community are like frowned upon, because it would come off as like me complaining, especially with my family coming from like an immigrant background where it's like they've suffered through so much and endured so much, like coming to America, that they might not see me like eye to eye with the issues that I'm experiencing. But besides that too, one of the main driving forces is that I'm so driven to make the work in my head like come to life. I don't want it to be like something just stuck in my head.
So what advice would you give a freshman or sophomore just starting out in the Viz Arts department at UCSD? Any tips for navigating classes, professors, or resources you wish you had known earlier?
One main tip would be to be overly ambitious sometimes, maybe even delusional. I think it's so much more beneficial to have that drive and self-belief in yourself to like pursue things that may seem out of reach, rather than staying like complacent and not wanting to like further yourself. So I know that the quarter system goes by so far and you only have 10 weeks to do things, but think of it as using this opportunity as like a stepping stone to get insight, so that maybe this artwork may not like fully work out right now, but down the line at least you have insight on how to like perfect it to your liking.
Great. And so as a final question, you're about to graduate, and that's always a challenging moment for artists. So how do you anticipate the transition from student to professional artist, and what are you planning to do this summer, and what are your future plans?
I think the change is going to be so drastic for me. Talking about my status as a commuter, I've solely been making work in the studio here and like trying to avoid making art at home. I really want to like separate my home life away from my own life, because even like spatially there's no space at my house to be doing it. And at least in the summer, this sounds kind of bad, but I think I might be experiencing like a slow pivot away from art temporarily, because I have 10K worth of loans to pay off. And it's like looming over me, and currently right now I'm working at the convention center, and over the summer I know that Comic-Con is going to hit. And so I want to like dedicate at least that portion of the summer to just like working and having art just wait for just a moment, while I try to like help out my family financially and myself.
That's great. Also, there's ways to work, make drawings, make things that are easier to make on the go, and just keeping your hands in the materials, even if you have to step away from like a full-time studio practice. And then also just recommending trying to find a garage or any kind of space that you can get with your peers, and just so that, you know, you each have a corner, and you have somewhere to go where you're not sort of working under the eyes of your mom or your, you know, which would be challenging for anybody. So thank you, Angelo, for this wonderful conversation today. What impresses me so much about your work is how you use paint so elegantly and with such confidence to express your complex ideas. You've been able to transform this everyday experience of commuting that some people might be frustrated by or think of as mundane into a rich metaphor for larger questions about time, movement, and belonging. By focusing on landmarks and vehicles that define your daily journey, you've created art that speaks to both your personal experience as a Filipino-American student navigating between worlds and to bigger universal questions about where we're going and how we mark our progress through life. So thank you so much, Angelo.
Thank you.
Yay. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode of Introducing New Artists, Conversations with Visual Arts Majors at UCSD. I just want to thank the UCSD Visual Arts Department for making this series possible. So until next time, thank you, everybody.